I've often heard it said that companies that offer inclusive work environments are also filled with employees who walk in acting as though they were owners, not as though they were renting space. Imagine working for an organization where every employee, irrespective of their rank and title, their gender, their ethnicity, their age, their sexual orientation, their abilities or disabilities, their immigration status, and every other dimension of diversity, would walk in feeling empowered to be able to create the best solutions for challenges and issues they saw in the workplace, big or small. Think about the kind of outcomes that would drive. Think about the kind of company that could be, where everyone feels like I have a voice. In the 1980s and 90s, there was one such company, and it was recognized as one of the most admired companies in the world. Yes, that company was Merck. I'd like to tell you a story of a young man who was about 31 years old. He was MBA credentialed, he was a finance professional, and he worked at the office of the CFO at Merck. Smart, analytical, deeply passionate about his work, and he was really dedicated to helping Merck make the most prudent financial decisions so that they would be responsible for showcasing the impact of their incredible research division. Merck used to come up with some of the most innovative, creative pharmaceutical products in the world at that time. In 1992, he was given a challenge. The challenge was he was asked to analyze the viability of building a new facility to manufacture a drug that was called Mustrogen. If you're not familiar with that drug, it was, seemingly an ordinary one, but it was a miracle drug when it was first found. Very potent, and the first chemotherapy drug that was ever invented. The first one was produced as a byproduct of, yes, you guessed it, mustard gas. In World War I, this mustard gas rained down in the foxholes where the soldiers were trying to fight this war, and it caused terrible, terrible side effects. Long-term health issues, blindness, many died. But in the midst of this horror, scientists discovered something really interesting, an application that they could have never guessed. Mustard gas in very, very small controlled doses could cause mutations in your bone marrow. It suppressed your immune system. And guess what? It could arrest certain kinds of cancer. For those of you that have ever read John Gunther's Death Be Not Proud, he actually writes about this drug because that's the drug his son Johnny Gunther got. What was interesting was since the 40s, this product, Mustrogen, that came from mustard gas, was really a frontline chemotherapy treatment, and Merck and Company produced it. Although newer therapies were emerging, they still continued to produce Mustrogen because it was very often the last choice that was available to certain kinds of recurrent cancers. Because it was so toxic, the facilities in which they manufactured this drug had to be refurbished every few years. Can you imagine? It was so toxic that it would corrode all the equipment, just, completely making it untenable to continue using it. So what happened was there was a cost obviously associated with it, and as newer drugs came into the marketplace, what was interesting was, it took on what they called an orphan drug status, which means they never made enough money to be able to recoup their investment, the investment for building the new plants and the investment of what they could charge the patients for manufacturing this drug. So essentially, it was a loss leader. Forget about a loss leader. Merck literally made no money on this. But they had to make a decision. Do we continue to keep manufacturing it? Back to this 31-year-old finance professional I talked about. He was given this task of deciding whether Merck should build another new plant and continue to produce this. And he approached it with the same passion and the work ethic that he had always had. And what was interesting about it was he did all the financial analysis, and he came up and figured out there was really no way Merck should actually be manufacturing this drug. So if that was what he was going to take to his leadership and board, the answer would be, let's shut it down. That's it. Don't build a new plant. But guess what? He really thought about it a little bit differently. So he said, this is not part of what I learned in business school. This isn't how I was taught to think about financial analysis. He actually added a layer of analysis that was quite unique and quite innovative. It wasn't just about the dollars and cents. He went back to the last time the plant had been refurbished, and he looked at the time gap between that last refurbishment and 1992, and he went back and looked at the analysis to see how many lives had been saved. How many people had taken the drug and survived long enough to either get at the next level of chemotherapy or just survived. So he began to quantify the benefit in human lives. And this was really a very different way of looking at the issue. Let's stop and think about it for a moment. We make decisions mostly based, especially the industry that I came from, originally financial services, you make decisions based on the cost-benefit analysis of here's what it costs, here's what I make, and this is the gap. So the profound question here was, let's go beyond that and look at the human lives and the impact beyond just the financial costs. Merck's leadership now had a really pivotal decision to make. So he took this analysis, he presented it to the leadership, and he presented it to the board. And guess what? This was a company that had a soul. This was a company that had always thought about corporate social responsibility differently, even in those years in the 80s and 90s. So let's think about that. So the decision that board made was a testament to continuing to refurbish that plant and to building the production unit needed to manufacture this drug. And it was a testament to their commitment to corporate social responsibility, but also about something that they had always believed in. For those of you that were aware, in the 80s, Merck had a drug called ivermectin. In fact, your pets probably still get it. And they found a side benefit of this drug was that it cured a disease called river blindness, which is a disease that affected the skin's eyes. It was some kind of worm that came up through the bottom of your feet, very common in Africa and parts of South America. And there were two scientists, William Campbell and Satoshi Omura. They were actually awarded the 2015 Nobel Prize for medicine and psychology, simply because they had really figured out another use for it, and essentially it eradicated river blindness in Africa and in South America. And what was interesting was the positive impact was that it helped 200 million humans. And if you go to the Merck headquarters, you will see that the grateful nations had donated a statue of an elderly grandfather with a stick that he was holding, being led by his young grandson, because that's what the villages were filled with. It was filled with older blind people being led around by younger people in the village. And thanks to Merck, the caption there says something like, "This is no longer a reality in the world," which is remarkable. So the notion of responsible citizenship was not new to Merck. Now let me bring the story a little closer to home. 8 years later, in the year 2000, I was diagnosed with my second bout with Hodgkin's lymphoma. If anyone's faced a serious illness, any kind of cancer, you know that so much uncertainty, fear, a complete sense of helplessness when you go on this journey. So the first time I was treated with, for a chemotherapy cocktail with 4 drugs, state of the art, cutting edge, amazing. Sadly, it didn't work. So they had to go back to an older version that included mustrogen. Now remember, it's 8 years later. And so I got on the second cocktail, and as grateful as I was to be receiving it, I received the drug every other week for 8 months. And I still can recall how when it coursed through my veins, the only way I would describe it is in my mother's words, and she said, "I watched you as the chemo coursed through your veins. You wilted like a flower, and I watched you die a little bit every time." And that's what the drug felt like. It was so toxic that each time they gave me the chemotherapy, that vein would die. And, they had to ultimately put in a catheter in my chest to be able to have that go through my body. So, toxic drug, but I was so grateful to have the option to actually receive it. And it gave me another lease on life. The MOP chemotherapy treatment worked for a while. Unfortunately, my cancer recurred. I'm a 6-time survivor. I've had Hodgkin's disease 5 times and breast cancer once. And then there was gene therapy, and then there was a T-cell therapy. So I stand here a little bit of tribute to the miracle and power of modern medicine and science and companies like Merck and others who continue to do incredible work around this. The pictures you see are those of my family. Some I have very little hair, some I have a little more hair. And the first time I was diagnosed, my son was not even 2. And you will see something pretty remarkable in this next picture. That tall guy in one corner, one end is my husband, the other end is my son. He's 6'7". So I was really grateful. He's 29 this year, and I'm grateful to be around to see him and my daughter grow. Now you may be wondering, how does this woman know so much about the inner workings of Merck's financial decisions? I know this story firsthand because that 31-year-old financial professional, that very thoughtful young man, is Jim Barry, who is my college sweetheart and my husband since 1986. So when Jim made that recommendation to refurbish that plant and continue manufacturing mustrogen, he had no idea that 8 years later that his wife would need that very drug. So I ask you to think about the consequences of decisions we make in our lives. As leaders, we are constantly faced with decisions, in my case now, around inclusion and exclusion in workplaces and in our societies. And we live in a world where the pace of change is just so incredible. So I ask you to think, do we take the easy way out and just look at the financial tally and make a decision just based on what we see on the surface? Or do we go deeper? Do we go further? Do we think about how the decisions we make today would impact ones that are near and dear to us, our loved ones, a year from now, 3 years from now, 8 years from now, 80 years from now? And I ask you to think about every decision we make, small and big, and think about it as it impacting somebody that was really close to us. Would we make a different decision? I often say, when I have to make a really tough decision, and I'm so exhausted because I've tried every avenue and I'm ready to stop, I ask myself, if my children's lives depended on it, how much harder would I try? And I'm willing to try just that little more. And I ask you to think about that perspective when you make decisions, small and big. Let's take this mindset and apply this to our roles as leaders. This is a case of, in my case, it was who lived and who died, but we're not doing that every day, are we? So the notion that if we can think about the impact of our work and our decisions as individuals and as leaders in the work we do, we would have a better world to live in. Inclusion isn't just corporate responsibility. It is each of our roles, obligations, and opportunities to try and do just that little bit more, to care just a little bit more, so we can create a world that we can all be proud of being a part of. Thank you.